The note on the handlebar, Marcus Hammer. Sullivan found the envelope tucked under his bike's throttle grip on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray October day that made everything feel heavier than it should. The paper was expensive, cream-colored linen stock, and his name was written across it in shaky cursive that belonged to another era. He almost threw it away. People left notes on bikes sometimes, complaints about noise, threats from rival clubs, occasionally a phone number from someone feeling brave. But something about the careful way it had been placed, protected from the morning dew, made him unfold it instead. Dear Mr. Sullivan, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Margaret Kowalski from 47 Maple Street, the yellow house with the rose garden you probably roar past every morning on your way to wherever it is you go. I've watched you and your friends ride by for 3 years now, and I'll admit I used to close my windows when I heard your engines coming, but I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, the kind you do when doctors give you timelines instead of treatments. I don't have family anymore. My Henry passed in 2003 and our daughter went before him, which is the wrong order for these things. My church friends mean well, but they're busy with their own families, as they should be. The reason I'm writing is because last Tuesday I fell in my garden, broke my hip on the flagstones Henry laid 40 years ago. I was there for 2 hours before anyone came. I called out. But you know how it is in neighborhoods now. Everyone's inside, doors closed, lives sealed up tight. Then I heard your motorcycle. You stopped. I don't know why. Maybe you saw my hand sticking up from behind the hedge. Or maybe you just had a feeling. You called 911 and you stayed with me. You took off your jacket and put it under my head. You told me about your mother's garden and how she grew roses too. You made a scared old woman feel less alone. I'm writing because that ride you have planned for Saturday, the one I heard you and your friends talking about in my driveway while we waited for the ambulance. I need you to cancel it. I need you to come to 47 Maple Street instead. The letter continued for another page, and by the time Hammer finished reading, his coffee had gone cold. Saturday arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn sunshine that made riders ache to be on the road. The club had been planning this run for months, a charity ride up the coast, 200 miles of curves and ocean views, ending at a veterans memorial. Hammer had already collected $3,000 in pledges. Instead, at 9 in the morning, he was standing on Margaret Kowalski's front porch with 7 of his brothers from the Iron Brotherhood MC. None of them were wearing their cuts, just jeans and work shirts, tool belts hanging heavy on their hips. Margaret answered the door in a wheelchair, her leg in a cast covered with signatures from nurses. She looked smaller than he remembered, from that day in the garden, but her eyes were sharp and bright. "You came," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly. "Yes, ma'am," Hammer replied. "All of us." She'd been precise in her letter about what she needed. The house was too much for her now. Too many stairs, too many repairs that Henry would have handled. Too many things breaking down the way old things do. She couldn't afford to hire help, and she couldn't afford to move, but she also couldn't live somewhere that was falling apart around her. "I'm not asking for charity," she'd written. "I'm asking for a trade. You give me one Saturday, and I'll give you something in return, something I think you need even more than I need those repairs." They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. Tommy wrenched Chen, fixed the furnace that hadn't worked properly in 2 years. Marcus's cousin David replaced rotted boards on the back deck. Snake, who'd been an electrician before he'd been a biker, rewired the kitchen where outlets had started sparking. Doc, who actually was a doctor, though he didn't practice anymore, installed grab bars in the bathroom and checked all her medications. Hammer himself worked on the garden, repairing the flagstones where she'd fallen, pulling weeds that had gotten out of control, staking the roses for winter. It was peaceful work, the kind that made the noise in his head quiet down. Margaret moved between rooms in her wheelchair, bringing them water and sandwiches, telling stories about the house and Henry and their daughter Claire, who died of cancer at 37. She didn't ask them why they rode motorcycles or why they wore leather or any of the questions strangers usually asked. She just talked to them like they were people, which was a smaller thing than it should have been, and a bigger thing than most people realized. Around 3 o'clock, they gathered in the living room for a break. The house smelled like coffee and sawdust, and the lemon oil someone had used on the old woodwork. "I suppose you're wondering about the other part of the deal," Margaret said. Hammer nodded. They'd all read the letter. He'd shared it with the club, and every man there had volunteered immediately. Margaret wheeled herself to a bookshelf and pulled down a photo album. "This is Claire," she said, opening to a picture of a young woman with her mother's sharp eyes and a smile that could light up a room. And this is why I asked you here. The next photo showed Claire in a leather jacket, sitting on a motorcycle, looking free and fierce and fully alive. She rode, Snake said quietly. For 5 years, Margaret confirmed. Henry hated it. We fought about it constantly. I said terrible things, told her she was selfish, that she was going to kill herself, that people would think she was trash. Her hands trembled on the album. She died in a hospital bed, not on a road. And the last real conversation we had was an argument about that damn motorcycle. The room was quiet except for the old house settling around them. After she was gone, I found her journal. She wrote about riding, about how it was the only time she felt like herself, like she wasn't defined by her disease. She wrote about the people she met, the community she found. She wrote about freedom. Margaret looked up at them. And I realized I'd spent 5 years being afraid of the wrong things. I was afraid of the motorcycle when I should have been afraid of wasting time being angry. She closed the album carefully. When you stopped to help me, Mr. Sullivan, I recognized something. The way you were patient, the way you made me feel safe. That's who my daughter rode with. That's the community I was too blind to see. Mrs. Kowalski? Hammer started, but she held up a hand. What I'm trying to say is that you gave me back those 5 years. Not literally, of course, but understanding. Peace. She smiled, and it was her daughter's smile. So that's the trade. You gave me a house I can live in safely. I'm giving you forgiveness for something you didn't even do, from someone who needed to give it. Wrench wiped his eyes and didn't bother hiding it. Doc cleared his throat roughly. Snake just nodded, understanding something unspoken. There's one more thing, Margaret said. She wheeled to the closet and pulled out Claire's old leather jacket. I've been holding on to this for 15 years, keeping it like a shrine. Like if I preserved it perfectly, I could preserve her. But that's not what she would have wanted. She held it out to Hammer. I'd like you to have it, wear it. Let it be used the way she used it, for living. Hammer took the jacket with hands that weren't quite steady. It was good leather, well cared for, broken in by someone who'd loved it. On the back was a small patch, a pair of wings and a rose. I can't, he began. You can, Margaret said firmly. And you will, because that's what she would have wanted, not a monument, but a continuation. They finished the work as the sun set, installing the last of the safety equipment, making sure everything was secure. Before they left, they stood in the living room one more time, these 7 rough men in an elderly woman's house, looking at each other and at her, and understanding that something significant had happened, even if they couldn't quite name it. Mrs. Kowalski, Hammer said, we do a ride every spring, first Saturday in May, memorial ride for veterans, but it's really for everyone we've lost. Would you want to come? We could get a sidecar, make sure you're comfortable. Her eyes filled, but she smiled through it. I would be honored. And ma'am, this was from Snake. That garden of yours is going to need regular maintenance. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to come by sometimes. My wife keeps trying to teach me about roses, and I keep killing them. Could use a good teacher. And I'll check on that furnace monthly, Wrench added. Old systems need regular attention. One by one, they offered pieces of themselves, time, skills, presence. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because Margaret had given them something they hadn't known they needed. Recognition that they were more than their jackets, more than their bikes, more than the stereotypes people carried. As they filed out, Hammer paused at the door, Claire's jacket folded carefully over his arm. Thank you, he said, for the letter, for trusting us. Margaret reached out and squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Thank you for stopping. That's where it all started, with someone choosing to see another person and help them. Everything else is just what grows from that choice. The Iron Brotherhood MC didn't make their coastal run that day, but 6 months later, on the first Saturday in May, they rode with a sidecar attached to Hammer's bike. Margaret sat in it, wearing a helmet decorated with roses, Claire's old leather jacket draped over her shoulders. They rode to the Veterans Memorial, and then to the cemetery where Claire and Henry were buried. Margaret placed flowers, roses from her garden, which Snake had helped her nurture back to full glory. Standing there among the headstones and the motorcycles, with the sun warm and the engines quiet, Hammer thought about the letter that had changed everything, about how the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways you couldn't predict, about how family wasn't always the people you were born to, but sometimes the people who stopped when you needed them to stop. He wore Claire's jacket now, part of his regular rotation. The wings and rose patch had become a symbol in the club. Not official, but understood. It meant you stopped. It meant you helped. It meant you saw people, really saw them, and treated them with the dignity they deserved. Margaret became a fixture at their clubhouse, showing up for barbecues and poker nights, teaching them all how to properly care for roses, telling stories about Henry and Claire and a life fully lived. She was tough and funny and didn't take any nonsense from anyone, which made her fit right in. When she passed away 3 years later, peacefully in the bedroom Henry had carried her into as a bride, the funeral was packed. Her church friends were there, but so was the entire Iron Brotherhood MCs and 24 other riders from clubs across the state. They had all heard the story by then, about the letter and the garden and the jacket. At her request, they buried her in one of the club's t-shirts. And at her further request, they took her ashes on one final ride, that coastal route they'd missed that first Saturday, 200 miles of curves and ocean views. Hammer still has the original letter, framed now and hanging in the clubhouse. Next to it is a photo of Margaret in the sidecar, grinning like a teenager, wind in her white hair. Under the photo is a small plaque that reads 47 Maple Street, where we learned that stopping is sometimes more important than riding. The yellow house with the rose garden went to the club in her will, a surprise that made more than a few grown men cry. They use it now as a community space, teaching neighborhood kids how to maintain bikes, hosting support groups, keeping the garden exactly as Margaret would have wanted it. And every Saturday morning, Hammer and whoever else is around ride past that house, slowly, respectfully, before heading out on whatever journey the day holds. It's a ritual now, a reminder that the best rides aren't always about distance or destination. Sometimes the best ride is the one you cancel because someone needed you more than the road did. Sometimes stopping is the whole point.